Well, welcome to the course. War in World History, 1651 to 1899. That's the way it is in the course description. I'll tell you right now, it's a bit of a misnomer because we're going to begin more like 1500, maybe even a little bit earlier than that. You can't really understand later developments unless you understand what happened in the century or so before the point where the course notionally begins. What I want to do in this segment is just to talk to you informally about the course. And the way that things are going to operate, by the way, in the course is that many of the presentations that you're going to be watching were recorded with the idea of being used more than once. But it's my policy to have a presentation at the beginning of each module that is directed specifically toward the course, toward the students that I'm teaching immediately, right now, and that this is one such presentation. What's behind me, by the way, is Fort Jesus in Mombasa, Kenya, which is a major port. It's on the Indian Ocean. It was built by the Portuguese in the 16th century. It's called Fort Jesus. Back then, it has since been anglicized into Fort Jesus because Kenya was colonized by the British. People speak English there as well as Swahili. And this particular fort is an example of the kind of fort that began to be constructed in Europe in the early 16th century. It was called an artillery fortress, or sometimes called the Tres Italienne, because this kind of fortress originated in Italy. And this kind of fortress was just so well adapted for its purpose, which was to withstand enemy artillery and also to use artillery effectively against any attackers. This kind of fortress was so well designed and so effective that variations on it appeared the world over. And so, here's an example of it in Kenya. If you go to Puerto Rico, to San Juan Harbor, you will find another example of this artillery, this very distinctive artillery fortress. If you go to St. Augustine in Florida, you will see another example of it. If you go to Fort McHenry in Baltimore, where the Star-Spangled Banner comes from, that too is a variation on this artillery fortress design. We're going to be talking a lot about the artillery fortress during the early part of the course. That's what it's doing as the virtual background for this particular Zoom recording. As most of you know, with Zoom meetings, you can put up what's called a virtual background. And I'll be using virtual backgrounds throughout the course, partly to disguise the fact that my office is kind of a wreck with books and papers everywhere. But also for pedagogical reasons. I'll be using a different virtual background with each module, and we'll talk about it in terms of the pedagogical significance, the relationship to the course each time, as I've just now done with Fort Jesus. So, what can I tell you about this particular course? One thing about it is that this emphasis on war in world history is something of recent vintage. I'll talk about this more down the line a bit, but until basically the turn of the 21st century, military historians look mostly at the European and the American military experience. When I got my own graduate training, it was in European military history and American military history. There really wasn't anything available to get any kind of graduate level training in world military history. And so this approach to military history is of recent vintage, and it is still evolving. And frankly, it is a course from which I learn a great deal, because having had no graduate training in this field, I'm kind of learning as I go along. And I tell you, one of the best ways to learn about something is to teach about something. It really gives you a reason to sort of drill down into the books and to pay close attention to what is going on, because you're going to have to turn around and teach it um, to people. Let me tell you a little bit about me, so you have some sense of what I'm like as a human being, and something about my background. As a human being, the thing that's most important to me right now, and will be important to me for the rest of my life, incidentally, I'm 62 years old, is my 10-year-old daughter, Chloe. She is just the most fun in the world. Just has a beautiful temperament. She's smart. She's friendly to people. She's just one of those people who just kind of has this kind of a sunshine, kind of a radiance to them. So in personal terms, that's my daughter's the most important thing in my life. And the last important task I see myself as having, as a human being, is the task of being a father. Obviously, I came to fatherhood late in life. But that's actually had its advantages, because by the time I became a father, I had established my identity. I knew who I was. I had established my career. I was just set in a variety of ways. I had a chance to do as much traveling, really, as I really wanted to do around the world, to many places, including Kenya, including this very place, Fort Jesus, which I visited in 1985. So there's that. But in terms of my background as a professor, it all started actually when I was an undergraduate, just like you, here at the Ohio State University. I entered Ohio State in the fall of 1977, and I came here for two reasons, and two reasons only. It was close and it was inexpensive. I had no idea when I came to Ohio State just how good a university it was, and frankly, it's become better in the years since then, the decades since then. But it was pretty good, back then. Something I really didn't appreciate when I started here. Why did I come? Because it was close. Because I lived just up the road. I live on the far north side of Columbus, so it was an easy commute. And that's one of the things I sort of have mixed feelings about, because I worked a job while I went to the university, which meant that I missed out on a lot of sort of campus life. And by the way, if you're not taking advantage of all the things, all the possibilities, all the life that goes on this campus, open your eyes and get involved and take it in, because it's remarkable what goes on here. Don't let it just pass you by. Well, being a commuter student, I just say I missed out on a lot of this stuff. I worked a job. Now, working the job enabled me to pay my own tuition. It was actually possible to do that. Nowadays, you pretty much have to take out student loans. Just it's so much more expensive than it used to be. But back then, it was much more reasonably priced. During the time that I was an undergraduate here, I was one of those students who was bright, but not diligent about my studies. The courses that I enjoyed, I got A's in. The courses that I didn't enjoy, I didn't apply myself. I took a so-called gentleman's C, and I paid a very heavy price for that. There's no time right now to get into this, but that cost me some opportunities, and very nearly cost me the opportunity to become a professor, which is something that eventually I realized I would be good at. Now, people, when I was an undergraduate, notwithstanding my grades and so forth, they said to me sometimes, they said, Mark, you might make yourself a good professor, which to me at the time was like saying, Mark, you make a pretty good egghead. So I didn't find it flattering. But as time went on, I thought more about it. After I finished at Ohio State, a couple of years later, after completing my initial active duty training in the Army, I was in the Army National Guard for a number of years. I went off to London and got my master's degree in war studies at King's College, London. And by the way, during the year that I was there, the 13 months that I was there, I actually spent 2 months down in Africa, in what was then called Zaire, what is now called the Congo, and as I've said, in Kenya. So this period of time that I spent abroad was a tremendous education for me, not just at King's College London, but really more importantly, just by dint of living in London among students literally from all over the world and having the chance to experience just a number of other cultures. When I came back, I eventually came here, back to Ohio State, because Ohio State had then and still has the best graduate program in military history in the country. And that's not like, boosterism or chauvinism or whatever. The graduate program here at Ohio State is acknowledged by just about everybody as being the best such military historian. So if I wanted to become a military historian, this was the place to be. So once again, I found myself back at Ohio State. And then to my surprise, toward the end of the time when I was working on my dissertation, I was invited to compete in a national search for a military historian whose specialization was going to be in early American history. It's unusual for a graduate student to be hired directly onto the faculty of the institution in which she or he was trained, but that was my experience. And so now, having been an undergraduate at Ohio State and having got my PhD at Ohio State, I was now a professor at Ohio State. And I've been a professor at Ohio State now for just about 30 years. So one way or another, I spent virtually my entire life here at Ohio State, which on the whole has been a privilege. It's got its ups and downs like anything else. Let me talk a little bit about why I'm teaching an online course. It's not simply because we're dealing with a pandemic, which has so far killed almost 850,000 Americans, and it has made this country sort of a very dangerous place to be in kinds of ways. That's one reason to be teaching online, but for me, it's not the only reason. An important reason for me is that I have bipolar disorder. I was diagnosed with it when I was 26 years old. I've had to deal with it for many decades. I'm obviously not shy about talking about it. I've written about it. I've done other forms of mental health advocacy work. One reason that I'm being so candid with you about it is that I know that many students struggle with one kind of mental or emotional problem, and that in a class that consists of 100 students, I know that statistically, at least one student has been or will be diagnosed with bipolar disorder. And that can be very disorienting and fear-inducing and anxiety-provoking for someone who is young and just beginning their life, and then to discover that they have a serious mental illness. And they may feel like as a result they're a broken person, who will never be able to do the things that they wanted to do and that other people can do. And I'm here to tell you that's not the case. I can't help having bipolar disorder. It is driven by a sort of a biochemical problem in the brain chemistry that sort of artificially raises and lowers the volume of one's emotions, so to speak. but I've been able to manage it. There are tools by which to manage it. And part of managing it means to make adaptations in your life that allow you to be effective. Um, you know, even though you have, or I have, this particular challenge of dealing with bipolar disorder. 3 years ago now, 2019, the spring of 2019, I went into what's called a clinical depression, and I just was not able to pull out of it. My psychiatrist tried to help me. It was just intractable. And it reached the point where I was unable to meet a class that I was teaching enough that it looked almost as though I would have to turn over that class to another instructor. In fact, preliminary arrangements were made to do that very thing. Ultimately, I was able to pull out of it and to complete the course. And an important dimension to that was the tremendous support that I got from the students in the class who understood what I was going through, were extraordinarily supportive, and filled with sympathy or empathy for what I was going through. And that kind of encouragement was a major factor in my being able to rally and complete the semester. Nevertheless, I had to evolve a strategy for being able to teach effectively if that was to occur again. And one good strategy I was told, and I've since discovered is the case, is to teach online, because so much of the work of teaching an online course is sort of front loaded before the semester or whatever the course actually begins. So, if I have a bad day or bad several days, whatever, it's not the problem. It's not sort of the catastrophe that it would be in terms of teaching a face-to-face course. Nevertheless, I miss teaching face-to-face. One of the frustrations kind of teaching an online course is that I don't get to see you in class. I don't get to have a sense of who you are as people as readily. I can still do it, but it takes more effort, and it has to be done in a different kind of way. And you don't have an opportunity to experience me as a person either, or to get to know your fellow students. And sometimes just even if you don't really talk to other people in the classroom, you kind of get some sense of what the people around you are kind of like, and you become sort of familiar with them, and so on. And it's a very different thing than the relative isolation of just sitting in whatever room you're in and watching me on a screen. And so what I'm trying to do, as one of the challenges, many challenges of teaching an online course, but by the way, in certain kinds of respects, is very interesting. It's a very creative process. You kind of have to learn to do things in a different kind of way. But one of the challenges that interests me and that I'm really trying to push at is to figure out a way to push against this issue of limited human contact, limited human interaction that is sort of baked into an online course. The discussion groups that I'm setting up are one way by which to do that, but one way in which you as students will get to know at least some of each other, people within your group reasonably well, and have the opportunity to get to know them, them very well if you choose to put in sufficient effort to do so. And I encourage you to do that. And there's some other techniques that that I have tried and I'm going to try to help with that the process. Well, I think I've said enough for now by way of preamble. The next two presentations will give you an introduction to the architecture of this course, how it's going to operate, and to the major readings for which you are responsible. So I'm going to end it there, and you can pick up in a minute if you want to with the next presentation, half an hour if you want to. You can pick up with it next day. That's the beauty of taking an online course. You have that kind of control over your time. But make sure that it is controlled over your time, and and not just sort of putting things off. But you'll hear more about that down the line. In the meantime, take care.